Hello and welcome to the Dev Team NBA podcast. My name is Sean and joining me as always is the one and only Dante Boffa. Mr. Boffa, man, how are we?
Sean, I'm so good. Just had an iron infusion. I'm about to become powerful beyond belief.
Damn, Captain America right here.
Yeah.
How long does an iron infusion take? Is it simply just an injection or does it take a couple of minutes?
They've got 2 syringes filled with iron, which is just black. Turns out
Yeah.
iron's just really dark. And then the nurse just sits there and she just puts it into you slowly so that your body doesn't get overwhelmed. Took 20 minutes. In and out.
20 minutes?
In and out in 40 minutes. Doctor's appointment included. So
You called him the Jeep the other day.
at the Jeep.
Anyway, so after you visited your Jeep, you drove on over, ironically, and we just watched Matt Ryan hit the game-tying 3 to put the Los Angeles Lakers tied into overtime and then eventually win against the Pels. We won't talk about that game, but just pour one out. Don't actually, this is coffee, it'll stay on the carpet, but pour one out for Dyson Daniels. Bendigo boy who
missed two free throws to put the game out of reach.
Yeah.
Seconds before Matt Ryan hit that game time.
1.3 seconds before, but the commentators were gassing Dyson Daniels up as he took the slow walk to the free throw line because they're like, man, Willie Green trusts this rookie so much to put him in for a defensive only possession. Like that's so much. Misses the first free throw, and if he can just hit one of these free throws, he's going to ice the game. Like that's so mature for such a young player. Misses both. Game time.
LeBron defensive rebound called the quickest timeout I've ever seen in my entire life.
Before his hands touched it.
Mid-air, pointing at the referee with one hand, clutching the ball with the other hand. But that's enough gas bagging about a game that we're not going to talk about. What we do want to talk about, just off the top, before we dive into
the title of this episode.
The title of today's episode, our dear friend, Deep 2 contributor, co-host of the Jeff Van Gundy NBA Tribute Show, has made his debut on the Deep 2 Film Room, which you can find on our YouTube channel and all over our socials. The second installment of the Deep 2 Film Room, following on your excellent Dallas Mavericks-inspired installment from last season. Lukey jumps into the Minnesota Timberwolves. And specifically what the Minnesota Timberwolves can do on offense to accommodate their Twin Towers pairing of Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns, which we've obviously been talking about a lot in the early season. So Lucas just dives right into it and kind of dissects it with his basketball brain as only he can. So that's up on our socials and our YouTube right now. It's polished. It brings a certain Lucas panache. We love it.
Yeah, so the film room, as we mentioned when we launched it 8 months ago, is our just collection of ad hoc video essays about basketball, more particularly the NBA. And yeah, thanks to Lucas for writing this one. Very well edited by Niece Kylie, or should we just say Sean Carroll?
Niece Kylie's been on one with this. Niece Kylie's been on one for real.
But yeah, check that out. And yeah, honestly, any feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, would actually love to hear, because this is something that we don't do very often, and video isn't one of my strengths. So let us know if there's anything we can do better, if you like it, if you don't like it.
I don't want to hear that from you. Just own it. Just fucking say, we killed it, we crushed it.
No, but you can always get better, especially if it's the second time you've done something.
It's the craft.
Yeah, the craft.
Well, I'll just tell you right now, some positive feedback. It looks beautiful.
Thanks, Dante.
You've done a bang-up job.
Cool. I'll transfer you $10 for that. Those kind words later on. But let's move on to the main topic, which, Dante, earlier in the week, you and I were just like, oh, okay, we'll do the pod Thursday. Obviously said you'll come around a little bit earlier because you had something on. So come around earlier, we'll talk about it. And then I think we might have mentioned, or maybe we thought it just, hey, we'll talk about what we're going to talk about later. Like, we'll figure out the topics. And thankfully, the Brooklyn Nets soap opera has just continued to produce content and be a spring of content. And if you look across the way, you can actually see Monty McNair sipping from that same spring. That's a bit
fountain of McNair.
That's a deep cut. But yeah, fucking so much has happened since we planned to do this pod today.
Yeah.
And well, I've drawn up a little bit of a timeline for what's happened in the past couple of days with the Brooklyn Nets. And do you want to start us off?
Well, I think the best way that we should tackle this, I think we should just go through the timeline one by one. And before we kick things off, this is a pretty gross topic in general. There's a lot of really sinister stuff going on with the Brooklyn Nets at the moment, and that's not even talking about the 2-5 start that they've had to the season after barely sneaking past the Indiana Pacers the other day. it's been, as you mentioned, like a week of drama in Brooklyn. Kicked off with none other than Kyrie Irving, who I believe it was early this week or late last week, shared a link on Instagram and Twitter to a film which was based on a book of the same name in 2018 called Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up, Black America. The conceit of which, and I think this is important because I don't think that this has been covered a lot in the global media outcry around this, which is justified. The conceit of the book and the film is that black people, not specified whether it's just American black people or like Pan-African black people, are actually the original Hebrews, God's chosen people who originally lived in Israel and the Levant. And through various schemes and plots and machinations, white people globally, but specifically white Jews, have robbed black people of their like birthright and their covenant with God and taken their place, which is just fucking batshit. I mean, right off the top, like the film itself uses various anti-Semitic tropes. It even includes a quote, a misattributed quote. Like it's literally just
incorrect.
Just like it's made up. It's a false quote from Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
If you're quoting anything from Adolf Hitler and you're not using it to illustrate that this is the most fucked up shit ever, like then you shouldn't be using the quote, let alone a fake quote. So when Kyrie was challenged on the anti-Semitic nature of the content that he shared, most notably in a press conference where journalist Nick Friedel, author of Blood in the Garden, we love it, confronts him and says, can you talk about promoting this video? He doubled down and essentially just said, I'm justified. I don't have to justify myself to you. I don't have to explain myself.
Luckily, after he was put into a corner where, Nick Friedel, like, credit to him, asked him in very plain terms, why did you do that? You know that you've got a very big platform. Why are you sharing something that is so hurtful? And then when asked about it and when sort of cornered, Kyrie was like, nope, you're just doing this for more Instagram clicks. I don't want to have anything to do with this. Next question. Nick, to his credit, kept asking him the question, saying, no, I'm going to keep pressing on this. This is very, very serious. And he simply said, no, next question. Press conference ended, and he hasn't spoken to the media since.
Yeah, and the silence has kind of been a bit deafening, and the Nets have said that he's not going to be speaking to the media for the foreseeable future, which from their end is obvious damage limitation, because when he speaks, often controversial things follow. But the silence from him has actually been deafening, because it's pretty obvious, I think. Well, I guess there's two possibilities here for why Kyrie has shared this film, which again, it can't be overstated. It's literally like the conceit of the film and the book is quite ludicrous, not supported by any historical evidence whatsoever, and relies heavily on historical anti-Semitic tropes and current anti-Semitic tropes, which are very in line with like kind of conspiracy theories about like the Jews controlling the world and like the New World Order and those sorts of things, which are pervasive and disgusting kind of sentiments to be bringing to light. So I think the two possibilities for why Kyrie has shared this is that, one, he thought it was interesting and just wanted to get it out there, but didn't really deeply engage with the themes and the message of the work that he was sharing. And I won't say promoting, I'll say sharing. And I think if that's the case, then it's an act of gross negligence on his part for not understanding that he has such a massive platform, and not understanding that just by putting it out there, you can be doing a lot of damage to the Jewish community, both in America and worldwide. Not to mention in Brooklyn, which is historically in New York, where the Jewish community has lived since World War II.
And if Kyrie's defense to that, which he said multiple times before and for years, is, oh, but I'm just a person, I'm just like you, why can't I like something just like you? And it's like, no, I'm sorry, like, you're a famous basketball player who gets paid millions of dollars, has millions of followers, has one of the most popular shoes amongst people in the world. Like, I'm sorry, you just forfeit that right for just being, I'm just a person, I can't just like anything anymore, because there is so much weight with everything that you do. Like, you can't stand behind that defense anymore.
Well, you can't. Like, it's a complete misunderstanding of your role and misunderstanding of where you stand in both in society and in the NBA, where you're, like it or not, you're a multi-time all-star, you're a role model for young NBA players and for like kids. And I think that's the charitable way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that Kyrie actually watched the film and that it resonated enough with him for him to actively decide to share it out. And if that's the case, then it's pretty obvious that Kyrie holds clearly anti-Semitic views that are completely at odds with the NBA's idea of inclusivity and broad appeal to every market, and that no one should be kind of like left behind, and that it's something for everybody. This flies completely in the face of that, I think a really dangerous way, not only in the fact that it points to, that it directly kind of like marginalizes a specific group, but that specific group is kind of like often the target for dog-whistled conspiracy theories, throughout history. The history of Jewish persecution is rich and like absolutely awful, but also particularly at the moment when again, like I mentioned, like kind of a lot of the conspiracy theories that Kyrie has actively or not associated himself with through the COVID period, these ideas of COVID conspiracy and New World Order, like a lot of that is tied up in conspiracy theories targeted at the Jewish community. So the most likely reason for why he's done that is because he's an anti-Semite. And you're right, since the media conversation with Nick Friedel, he hasn't spoken. He released a statement through the nets. Yeah,
a very washed statement.
Where he didn't apologise. Where he didn't even give a like half-assed apology. Like, I'm sorry if he hasn't apologised or retracted his comments at all.
It's not going to be an apology through a PR team anyway. You have to come out and say something.
I mean, an apology through a PR team is better than what we've got in. Yeah. And he as along with the Nets have donated $500,000 to the Anti-Defamation League, which is an organisation, a not-for-profit that works specifically on reducing anti-Semitism. Cool. $500,000 for a dude making $38 million this year. Like, all right, he's donated like 1.5% of his yearly salary to a I don't know specifically the work that the ADL does. I'm sure that they're great, but that money is a very abstract way of making reparations for what you've done, when you could, using your platform and using your reach, which you yourself acknowledged in the press conference with Nick Friedel that you do have, make a public apology and retract the statement and try and actively make amends. I think what he's done is worse than nothing. And I think that it's so telling of the way that the NBA is kind of caught between wanting to be hands-on and hands-off. Yeah. Because the NBA has done nothing in this situation whatsoever. And again, I can't overstate it enough. Like, if there was a similar situation where there were kind of like racial hostilities being publicly made from one NBA player to another, or to a specific group, then that player would be suspended. And they've sat on their hands while something absolutely vile has been publicly perpetuated by one of their headline stars, for better or worse. He is one of the 20 to 25 best players in the league, and certainly one of the 10 most well represented in
Yeah,
terms of like
his shoes
clicks
are always
and-
in like the top 3 sales as well and stuff. And it's like, it is interesting that he's not facing any repercussions for this. Obviously, the $500,000 donation, I think you've done the maths in the past where someone got fined something and you said, oh, in terms of my salary, that's actually XYZ. It's actually, it's like a parking ticket. So he is going to actually avoid suspension, coming from Brian Lewis of Nets Daily. And he played in the following game, and he played the next game, and he went to a 12, which, obviously bad game, and there was obviously the photo of him just walking on the court, and there were the crowd, the courtside seats of people wearing shirts that says "Fight Antisemitism." And when he got introduced to the Barclays Centre crowd, there were no boos. Like, from what I could hear on the TV, there were no boos. He was just cheered maybe less than Kevin Durant, which, I don't usually watch Brooklyn Nets intros. I usually tune in as soon as in any game, as soon as the ball tips off. But, he wasn't getting cheered as loudly, but there were definitely no, like, boos, which sometimes you see when guys do something bad like this. Charles Barkley came out and said he should be suspended. Like, what the hell are we doing? Like, why did he play in the next game? The NBA Players Association came out and had a very washed statement where they're like, we're against discrimination of all kinds. And it's like, yeah, bro.
And didn't even
name him.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we could have assumed you're against discrimination of all kinds. Is this related to the Kyrie Irving situation, or is this just a random press release on a Tuesday? Just a whole lot of nothing. And there's been a precedent set, because when Myers Leonard a couple of years ago was playing Fortnite, which is a crazy sentence in its own, but when Myers Leonard said an anti-Semitic slur while playing video games on Twitch, he was suspended for a whole entire year, and since then he's never come back to the NBA. He also probably wasn't fit to come back into the NBA. He was on the fringes already, but there is a precedent of someone being anti-Semitic and they missed a year of basketball. Kyrie Irving played next game.
The Nets have done nothing. The NBA has done nothing when they could both reasonably be expected to. Yeah, like, if you actually did have your money where your mouth is, you could have done even something like even something nominal.
Yeah.
Would send a message that this is bad and we don't agree with it. Even if it does nothing to actually address the problem, at least you've sent the message and said, like, okay, in theory we disagree with this. They haven't even done that. And we'll get to the basketball side of things for this team later in the episode. There's a lot that we have to get to before we can do that. Myers Leonard was under contract, like you mentioned. Myers Leonard, obviously not a star, obviously a more disposable player than Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving, he's in the last year of his deal. If the Nets wanted to, they could waive him with very little financial consequence beyond this year. You pay him out, done. That's the consequence. And then you just make a clean start without this person as a part of your team.
Yeah.
But they've decided that someone who holds these views about a racial group, which is just insane to be saying. Like, again, I really do think that Kyrie does hold those beliefs, and it's not just a case of, I was ill-informed, or I didn't know what I was sharing, or I just thought some parts of it were interesting. I think the overwhelming likelihood is that Kyrie actually holds some pretty troubling beliefs. And the Nets, in their pursuit of making this era of Nets basketball work, are just again kowtowing to his nature, his true nature, which we've seen over and over again, is that he's a righteous fool, I think, is an appropriate way to describe it, where not only is he someone who's just a maelstrom of carnage around him, but believes that he's the smartest person in the room and that everybody else is missing something, or that everybody else is persecuting him because they don't see what he sees. And in actuality, he's just the lowest common denominator, and like, the team doesn't actually have to continue down this path where they empower him, because by keeping him on the team and letting him have the role that he does, he's empowered. And for there to be essentially no punishment at all, in fact, for Kyrie potentially to feel galvanized to the point where he's decided that other people calling him out is like their problem, and like he's just living how he wants to live and it doesn't actually affect anyone else. It's an organizational failure on the Nets' part, and they literally have made they've made a Faustian pact in bringing this team together and empowering him the way they have, and nothing good will come of it for them, as nothing good has come of it, because by empowering someone with with such little moral fortitude as Kyrie Irving, you're only going to get bad things.
And we've talked about this in plenty of segments over the past.
How many times have we had this conversation where he's done something?
This conversation, but also like we were so proud of the Brooklyn Nets for like being a playoff team out of absolutely nothing, just like scrounging for value, doing all like the sexy, smart GM stuff, and then all of a sudden they get to the top of the mountaintop where they're a free agent player. They've got every great role player under the sun. And then they go, let's like just hand over everything we've built towards to these two players. And like we are kowtowing to them. We're going to sign DeAndre Jordan to a 3 for 40 or a 4 for 40. Like we're going to get rid of everything, including Jared Allen, to get James Harden. We're going to do whatever it takes just to keep Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving happy. And it's just like, man, they did everything right. And we thought they had done something great. And I think when we did a podcast right after they signed Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, I was like, wow, incredible, amazing. I think you were very much a little bit like, okay, but he is an idiot. Like, let's just hold on. This is a lot of power for an idiot. You've turned out to be right, and I've turned out to be wrong, because like they have just handed everything over. Where it's like it's no longer, oh my god, look at this sexy organization. They're doing everything right. It's like, no, man, like they're doing everything we've seen them do, and it's just incorrect, and it's a shame.
And I think that the like this to me feels worse than like all the other times we've had the Kyrie conversation when he's done something like this, because I guess a lot of the other times you could kind of write it off as like, oh, okay, like you do you, like with the like the whole vaccination thing, like do your own research, all of that absolute saga that we went through ad nauseum a few years ago. You can kind of write that off and say like a severely misguided individual choosing the wrong hill to die on. But okay, this seems to confirm that he's actually a pretty bad guy. And it's one thing to entrust your team to someone like Kevin Durant, who's temperamental and maybe feels like he's misunderstood and like doesn't always set the greatest precedent for the team publicly. And the previous iteration of Kyrie Irving, where you can write him off and say like misunderstood kind of like curiosity. But it's pretty obvious now that Kyrie is a bad guy with some really absolutely like abhorrent views. So for them, like I said, to not only like not take any of the exit ramps that have been presented to them over the last few years, but to be doubling down on it again, it's really disappointing. And from ownership down, like Sean Marks, the GM, could have made a decision at any point to jettison him. Whether you're getting that for value or not, at some point it just becomes that's not the problem. And Joe Tsai saying he wants to sit down with Kyrie Irving, like, okay, to think that for the owner to think that he can just sit down with him and make him see the error of his ways, like, what does he fucking think he's the
dude thinks the world's flat?
Yeah, I mean, like, Joe Tsai must think he's the Messiah or something to be able to say, like, I'm going to sit down with Kyrie Irving and we're going to make him see the error of his ways. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. You can't converse with someone who thinks that. And also, I just wanted to share this as well. I think it's probably time for us to move on to the next unhappy part of this Brooklyn saga. I mentioned it right off the top, the context and the conceit of the content that Kyrie actually shared. Because in all of the media coverage, it's been rightfully foregrounded that it's very anti-Semitic. And that absolutely is the first thing that should be run with. But I haven't seen many actual like breakdowns or interpretations of the work itself and the guy who wrote it, whose name is Ronald Dalton Jr. And this information is according to his IMDb biography, which it seems pretty clear he wrote himself. He has one work published on IMDb, which is the film that Kyrie shared from 2018, Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt from the IMDb description. Let me find... Okay. Ronald's... while working at Sinai Grace Hospital in Detroit, Michigan, Ronald started to see the world in a different way. He started to see the suffering of his fellow black people on a grand scale and wanted answers. He asked God in a prayer one night for wisdom and knowledge to explain the madness he was seeing in the black community. God heard his prayers and opened Ronald's eyes to the truth. Ever since that day, God would reveal the truth to Ronald in bits and pieces about the true heritage of black people in America as it pertains to the ancient Hebrew Israelites of the Bible. Okay, so the whole thing, which erroneously attributes made-up quotes to Adolf Hitler and seeks to retroactively dispossess Jewish people of the place where they have lived for thousands of years, the evidence for it is that God revealed it to the guy who made the documentary, which is pretty fucking convenient. So I don't know, for someone who's spent the last 3 to 7 years doing his own research, I don't know if Kyrie realizes that this one doesn't exactly pass the sniff test.
It's not in the Harvard referencing tool.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, this is literally that whole thing is literally the meme where it's like there's a reference in a book that says it was revealed to me once in a dream.
Yeah, that's not an autofill. All right, so that happened earlier in the week, and then to maybe distract from that, I think it was the New Yorker or the New York Times wrote a feature piece on Steve Nash, talk about how he's such a great coach and he's so dedicated to the team. But that was, of course, overshadowed mere hours later when Steve Nash and the Nets, quote, parted ways, unquote. Nice little joke in there. Via Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. The decision was reportedly mutual. And then both Nash and ownership and management had some nice little, parting words on Twitter and in statements saying, like, wish him the best of luck, etc, etc. Steve Nash's been fired by the Brooklyn Nets. If you're going to fire someone this early into the season, once they get off to a slow start, maybe you should have done it in the off season. That is usually the case. But anyway, here we are. They fired their coach, and was it Jacques Vaughn who's going to step up as the lead assistant who will be taking over the head coaching duties, which I believe he did yesterday. But he will be there for the meantime. But a couple of hours after that, we get another piece of news coming from Shams Charania of The Athletic that the Nets are going to hire Ime Udoka as their next head coach. Ime Udoka, he of the suspended head coach, I've worded that one wrong. He's the dude who's been suspended for inappropriate conduct with the Boston Celtics. The Celtics gave him a 1-year suspension after very, very sort of cloudy wording for what he did in this team, and none of the newsbreakers have truly been able to find out what he did, apart from finding out that it was a inappropriate consensual relationship with the staffer. But since then, there's been some more things come out that say, what he actually did was inappropriate before the relationship. A lot of stuff going on, but the Celtics, once they suspended him, said, we're happy to let him walk, and if anyone wants to take him, we'll obviously eat his contract and you can just have him. The Nets were apparently one of many teams who were monitoring the situation, but the only team to actually hire him. Ime Udoka was an assistant coach 2 seasons ago, or 3 seasons ago, under Steve Nash, when he was in charge of the defense while Mike D'Antoni was in charge of the offense. But that doesn't really matter because Ime Udoka has been suspended for doing bad things, and fuck, just to cover up from the Kyrie stuff, they've gone ahead and hired a dude who is suspected of being a very shit guy. So Dante, what did you think when you saw this news?
I mean, I was absolutely kind of flabbergasted.
Me too.
Particularly on the back of the conversation that we've just had. And before I kind of speak on Ime Udoka at all, valet Steve Nash, he of the Brooklyn Nets, my all-time favourite player. And I remember saying when he got hired, in a jest, but also a burst of optimism, am I a Nets fan now? And obviously, no.
Well, just more on Steve Nash. I think he can still be a good coach. He won a lot of games as a head coach, and he took an injury-riddled team deep into the playoffs. How much more of a shit hand can you get dealt as Steve Nash as a first-time head coach? I
mean, culturally and organisationally, that's true. But at the same time, he had 2 of James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie available for a lot of that time, and didn't necessarily distinguish himself with his tactical approach to the game.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is understandable because he literally had no coaching experience when he was hired to be the head coach he was hired for relationship management reasons, and the reason why Ime was running the defense those 2 seasons ago, and D'Antoni was running the offense, is because they were like, okay, this guy needs like serious support from his assistants. I don't think you can really take much away from his stint there on a coaching level. On a personal level, he absolutely knocked it out of the park. Like, he handled himself with composure, with grace. I think he was very tactful in his public handling of his mercurial stars. I think we can say that all 3 of them were mercurial. And he dealt with one star deciding to sit out most of the season, then only playing away games. One star who they had traded the farm for, wanting to trade and sitting, like showing up out of shape and not playing, essentially. Kevin Durant being the bastion of solidity that whole time, the most reliable piece. Like, it's Kevin fucking Durant. He's the most temperamental superstar, we've had in the last 15 years. And he's the guy that was like holding it all together, which says something about the hand that Nash was dealt. So I think his ability to manage relationships and his ability to kind of like steer the ship through some troubled waters was commendable, but I don't think you can really say much about Nash the coach. Like, I don't think we had the opportunity to learn much about like what would you like what kind of offense does Steve Nash run? I couldn't tell you that question.
I completely agree, but also just being able to find useful guys, like, and that's probably a bit of front office as well. But putting Bruce Brennan into that Biggie Smalls role, like having Nick Claxton be like an actual fine center despite being drafted in like the late 20s and stuff, like to actually have good role players to empower these dudes, and definitely fucking helps to have Kevin Durant just shoot over the top of everyone whenever you want 2 points. But it's not like Portland where it's like, oh, role players there, they're going to go die. It's like guys actually like flourished, went on to get new contracts. Guys look good. Jared Allen, you could say look good before he got there. But there's been good things happen while Steve Nash is there. And look, I hope he gets some cushy assistant role, learns how to be like a really good coach, and hopefully he can be a great coach for years to come. I had a second point, but I completely forgot it. Do you want to move on to the Ime side of things?
Yeah. So Ime has been hired. You mentioned it before. He was suspended by the Celtics for a year for the full season, and that was going to be reevaluated after this season with Joe Mazzulla taking on head coaching duties for this season. But kind of pretty soon after Ime was suspended, reports came out that the Celtics, again, like you said, would be happy just to let him walk, and that he's essentially available. Yeah. And before we kind of like discuss maybe why he's not the best person to be leading an NBA franchise, that's literally unprecedented because Ime was someone who had
in the Coach of the Year discussion led his team to the finals.
This guy has coaching pedigree up the wazoo. He spent so much time learning from Greg Popovich. You might have heard of him.
I knew you were going to say that.
Like his coaching pedigree is kind of through the roof. Like he's got all those years as an assistant with Pop. He's got a year as a lead defensive assistant. He comes into the NBA and they go 51-31 in his first season and make it to the finals.
Also, a lot of emotional turmoil. Like an emotional leader that was able to turn this team around halfway through the season
and harness some
rough characters.
Yeah, well,
tricky.
Yeah, some temperamental characters in that locker room and navigates again some difficult waters. And he did it really well. 45 years old on a good contract, like kind of like the sky's the limit for this team. Yeah. And the Celtics are prepared to just like let him walk. They're saying like, we're gonna completely just cut ties with you.
Cut ties with the coach of the future.
If that like opportunity comes around, we're just gonna do that. An NBA coach has never been suspended for anywhere near as long as that, let alone by their own team. It wasn't even like it was a league thing. It's the Boston Celtics looking into this and saying, actually, you can't be around anyone in our organization for 12 months, and then we'll come back to it.
But also on that, like what happens to that suspension? Because it seemed like, because Adam Silver wasn't really doing anything, it seemed like the Celtics were like, hey, we're going to suspend him, don't worry about it, we'll figure this out 12 months from now. So now that he's been let go, is he just going to like be the coach tomorrow? Is he going to be the coach next week? Also, something Sean Marks hasn't confirmed. Sean Marks, when he was asked about, hey, have you hired a new coach? He goes, no, we haven't hired anyone yet. This was obviously leaked through Shams Charania. But it's like, what happens to that suspension, because now the league's like, oh, hang on, we thought everything was sorted because you got that 12-month suspension, you sorted it in-house. Well, now he's in a different house. Like, what?
Well, the suspension doesn't apply.
Yeah.
The suspension goes completely out the window, and Ime will be on the court coaching the Nets, in the foreseeable future. But to talk about the allegations that were made against him, what we know is that it was a consensual relationship with the junior staffer, his subordinate on the Boston Celtics. He used crude and inappropriate language with the staffer at the team facility in a team context. Now, that's not a lot of information, and for the most unprecedented coach suspension the NBA has ever seen, it's certainly not a lot of information. So I don't think that it's
the full picture. Yeah,
the full picture. I don't think it's out of place to question whether there is something more substantial and more tangible that has gone on that would, much like Kyrie Irving, paint Ime in a pretty bad light in terms of his treatment to A, people in his immediate orbit, B, a romantic partner, and C, women. Like, someone who treats women in the way that he potentially has done is not someone who should be involved in any organisation, let alone be parachuted in at the top job. And the fact that the Celtics are just prepared to fully cut bait with the investment they've made in someone who is a great coach, like that much is obvious.
Yeah.
Like having him on the sidelines would help them win more games.
Yeah.
And they're still prepared to cut bait with him.
It's something pretty serious has happened.
It's something super serious has
And also
happened.
something I mentioned off air, but the timing of it was crazy because they had the next up-and-coming assistant who was just the guy who was going to get poached in Will Hardy. They saw that Utah wanted a new head coach. Utah asked for permission to interview Will Hardy, and they said, yep, that's fine. This is the natural progression of things. Utah, you can have Will Hardy obviously signed. Utah, the best team in the West right now. It's like they let their top assistant go. They let their next up-and-coming, the next Brad Stevens walk. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, like, fuck, we have to spend this guy for 2 months. And now Joe Mazzulla, who was the second assistant, has now got the top job. And I'll just add a couple of things on that. Coming from the Woj report, the Celtics had, quote, fully invested, unquote, in Mazzulla being the full-time coach from here moving on. But then coming from Jason Lloyd off The Athletic, he says that, now this is a little bit tricky as well because the whole thing with the Ime Udoka leaks that are coming out since he's been hired by the Brooklyn Nets unofficially, and also I wonder who the fuck's leaking this. The Celtics have been sitting on this and were hoping to maybe bury it like Tutankhamun, but all of a sudden they're like, oh, we might actually use this, if not for just chaos. I'm just going to assume that the Celtics aren't doing it for the goodness of their heart. So, yeah, it was that a few quotes from various players speaking to Jason Lloyd saying that the players simply just didn't know that Udoka was actually going to leave. Like, there was a quote here from Marcus Smart, which I'll paraphrase, where he just goes, I thought it was just a suspension. He was going to come back in a year. We were all working together as the team for, this 1 year with Joe who, and then just turn around 12 months later. Just turn around 12 months later and be like, all right, Ime's back. Now let's tackle this season with Ime. So the players didn't actually know that it was leaving. The players didn't know that this was actually going to be on the cards. And also a little bit weird because Ime it has been reported that he was involving the team and some of the players in those inappropriate conversations. So fucking weird, crazy sitch, bad week to be a Brooklyn Nets fan, arguably a bad 12 months to 24 months. Bad
time to be an NBA fan. We talk about it all the time. No more at the start of the season than what a great time to be a basketball fan. But like incidents like these make it really. I mean, I'll speak for myself here. They make me feel really gross about like cheering for a team or for like a team that incorporates people like that, or even the product. Like, how can you like love the product of the NBA? And don't get me wrong.
Like, how do you cheer for
freaking love
Kyrie?
Basketball, but you can't. Yeah, you kind of can't like. I don't know, like divide that I want to give the NBA my money and I want to support like my team and I want to be invested in this. This is something that's a big part of my life that I love. I'm doing a freaking basketball podcast after all. But you can't separate the fact that the NBA has kind of like stood by whilst Kyrie Irving has just been allowed free reign to like be publicly anti-Semitic and then double down and not even do so much as offer an apology. You can't really... I kind of find it difficult to separate that. And
like, do you cheer for Kyrie Irving when he does some crazy crossover now? Like, how,
well,
how do you do
I mean,
that,
never
you
cheer
know?
for Kyrie Irving anyway because he's absolute looney tune, and we've known that for years and years. But it's kind of, I was having this conversation with my brother earlier today. I'm kind of like living in fear for when this happens with the Phoenix Suns. I mean, I'm like on a level of the Robert Sarver allegations, which obviously he's in the process of selling selling the team. That's, by the way, not for nothing, another situation in which the NBA didn't do anything. Adam Silver is racking up L's faster than he can carry them.
Well, he also apologized 10 years later.
The Sarver thing, I think, is different because, like, I was publicly distanced from Sarver. Every Suns fan was distanced from Sarver. He wasn't someone who was, like, important to the day-to-day running
He's
of the
not
team.
dribbling the ball as well.
But it's like, how do you...
You don't buy his jersey, you don't cheer for him when he scores and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously everyone can have their own views and their own opinions, and I'm not going to always agree with what the people on the team that I'm cheering for say or do or think. But when it's something like this, which it's safe to infer, I think, that Ime's done something pretty bad, how can you cheer for the team? How can you have the conversation and say, man, like, Ime's got them playing such good D, like, they've gone from 26th in D to 5th in D, like, wow, amazing, when he's like a bad guy. And that's something that's more pervasive in sport and than just the NBA. Like, closer to home, it's something that's ever present in the AFL. But it's the most gross part of being a sports fan, is that you just want to kind of cheer for, like, the guys putting the ball in the hoop, but there's so many impediments to that.
So many asterisks on everything.
And I mean, to be honest, I find it difficult to kind of swallow these things and still have my, like, starry-eyed fan experience. Like, I'm becoming more cynical about these things because they just seem to keep happening. And just to touch on the Celtics before we continue on, they look like a really good... They've handled this in a really good way because they just immediately said... They presumably they've done their due diligence and investigated this and then said, like, nah, like, this is not very good. You can't be around the team. You're going to have to sit out the year. Which is good. And they've said, like, you can leave. Like, we don't really need. Which is not saying that NBA teams who make a living out of wringing every single cent they can out of whatever asset they have. Yeah. And he was a great asset for their basketball team.
Yeah, they definitely drop shit.
That's unprecedented that they would do that anyway. Yeah. But Joe Mazzulla, who is the
34-year-old bright-eyed head coach.
The 34-year-old bright-eyed head coach. Where have we heard that one before? Actually, also has domestic. I'll get the wording right. It's not domestic violence. Domestic battery charge from 2009 when he was in college. But he allegedly assaulted a woman in a public place. Now, Brad Stevens, when questioned on it a few weeks ago at the start of the season, said that they had 110% investigated everything and that they felt that that he was fully accountable for his actions and has, like, grown from that and, repented and moved on, and that's not who he is anymore. Which sounds great until you think about literally a year before they hired Ime Udoka, who, whether he was already doing those things or whether that only started after, you kind of investigated his character too much if he came in and immediately started, within the first 12 months he'd been in the building, struck up an inappropriate relationship with a staffer, and was using, crude and inappropriate behavior. Brad Stevens kind of actually had that great of an idea of who Ime really was, because a year later he's cutting bait with him in the most publicly humiliating way that they possibly could. So I don't know anything about Joe Mazzulla. I don't know anything about him as a person, his past. But it is safe to, again, call into question Brad Stevens' judgment in all of this, because he's shown that he has a propensity for falling victim to this exact thing. He's already made this exact mistake. And again, it's someone who, you know, like, it's difficult water to tread because it was a long time ago and he's a different person and whatever. But, like, that's not someone necessarily who should be, like, leading an NBA team, a team full of men who need a good example to follow, but also an organization filled with women. There are women who work for all of these
women that just
all of
happen to
these
with
teams.
Ime Udoka.
Yeah, like how could you as a woman kind of working for the Brooklyn Nets be like, awesome, the guy that they just hired to essentially be the boss has like these terrible allegations made against him.
Yeah.
You know, in the same way that, like, and this is something that Alessa's talks about both on the pod and in written form on the deep2.com. I can't believe it's that simple. The Cleveland Browns in the NFL bringing in Deshaun Watson and paying him $250 million, sending the message that this is the guy. He had 31 civil suits for, like, sexual assault leveled against him. How could you be a female employee at the Cleveland Browns? How could you? His transgressions were specifically related to assaulting women in massage parlors. What if you're a masseuse on the team and you have to massage Deshaun Watson? How are you gonna, like? It just kind of sends a really clear message to the women who are employed in these teams that you don't matter as much as winning basketball games. And yeah, that's sinister enough, but the fact that, like, inclusivity and, like, gender positivity and all of those things get, like, regularly levied by these teams as, like, a means of, like, positive PR, when in actuality the only things, like, the real actions that make a difference are that you're empowering abusers to come in at the top level of teams just because they know how to run a good defense.
Well, at least a silver lining we can take away from that is that we are actually having these conversations. And I feel like it really started in a big way a year ago when Chauncey Billups and Jason Kidd were hired as head coaches for their two teams. So a positive takeaway is that we are sitting here talking about it and dedicating half an episode to it because it is a big point. Whereas before, either it doesn't get reported or it doesn't get asked. And, you know, you mentioned Brad Stevens, how he was questioned about Joe Mazzulla when he had his introductory press conference. That's now a precedent, and it's now been said, okay, we've obviously got the whole thing with Neil Olshey where he's drinking the water and quickly trying to get the PR person to change the topic off of Chauncey Billups' previous incidents. So,
we should say, we've talked about it before, but, like, we shouldn't, in having these conversations, we shouldn't, like, just say words like incidents.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unpleasant, but Chauncey Billups was, I believe, was accused of gang raping a woman in 1977 and settled that case. It was an allegation, that's important to say, an accusation. Settled that case for an undisclosed fee out of court. So that's kind of pretty messed up. That's 100%. Pretty messed up. And, like, hiring people with these incidents isn't, like, it's not, you know, like, it's, yeah, and the definition of the word incident, yeah, but like, you know, Jason Kidd punched his wife in the face, and was convicted by a jury of his peers. Like, those aren't people who should be leading teams, organizations, people who are looking for guidance and like you in a position of power. Like, what kind of example are you going to set to the people on the team and to, like, the other coaches? And all of those people are predominantly men. So on that level, it's kind of like, well, you're not choosing the right men to set a good role model for the type of people you want your players to be. And that's completely secondary to, like I said before, the women who are trying to enjoy the NBA as a product, who are playing basketball, who are trying to make it to the WNBA, and the NBA is, like, you know, using the WNBA for essentially, like, social capital. Like, we're really supporting women's basketball, and it's like, awesome. Well, now at least four of the 30 NBA head coaches have either been accused of or convicted of domestic violence. So what kind of message is that sending to any woman who's involved in any way with basketball anywhere? It's sending a message that you don't matter, and that you're, you know, like, yeah, that women's rights, and even something as, like, base level and, universal as like making sure that good people are in our organization is not as important as like winning games. Anyway,
should we take a break before we talk about the basketball side of things?
Yeah, we should take a break and take a breath. We'll be right back.
The depth, the deep two. God, that's a mouthful. Anyways, I'm Marco, co-host of the Hey, Daniel Gafford, what's the name of our podcast?
The JVG NBA Tribute Show.
Wow, I can't believe it's that easy. Thanks, Gaff. You probably know us as two members of the four-man weave plus Marco, but we know you as our next listener.
Well said, Lucas. I gotta ask, how do we differ from the pack of basketball podcasts?
It's a great question, Marco. You see, on our basketball podcast, we have two male co-hosts.
Wow, truly groundbreaking. After this episode, stay on your favourite podcasting app and give us a spin.
So, on the basketball side of things, the Brooklyn Nets have made a major decision moving on from their head coach and hiring Ime Udoka. Ime Udoka...
What was that?
There's one word. Ime Udoka, who has a very good defensive reputation. I just want to know, like, how much can he or anyone else save the Brooklyn Nets? Because when we watch them, they're 2-5 at the moment with losses to some quite bad teams. They're 2-5 and they don't look good on offense and they don't look great on defense. Their starting lineup has an incredible offensive rating, I believe. That's one with Nick Claxton, Royce O'Neal, and Ben Simmons. You can guess the next two players. But on defense, they are not very good at all. But does that fix all their problems? Let's just start off with what we know is a constant. You've got Kevin Durant, who still looks like one of the best players in basketball at the moment. Obviously early season, but he's averaging 32.5 while shooting 53, 34, 94. Quite good. Royce O'Neal, who they traded one of their 2 first-round picks that they received in the James Harden trade. Royce O'Neal doing everything you could ever ask of Royce O'Neal. He's averaging just over 10 points a game, and he's shooting 41% on 6.1 threes a game, which is actually quite big for Royce O'Neal.
Yeah,
especially on a...
Not playing starters minutes,
and also a dude who like isn't a volume guy in an ecosystem that isn't good at getting role players good shots. Nick Claxton, I mentioned it before, he might be like one of the best per dollar center options. Obviously, you're going to have like some massive centers who are drafted in the lottery who are great, but Nick Claxton for a late draft pick, essentially playing on a minimum, I think he's a very fine role player. But Ben Simmons, like. He's averaging...
Go and say it.
4.3 fouls a night. I don't think it's worth saying what he's averaging in points, rebounds, or assists because there's not many.
It's not many.
He's taken away the triple single from Draymond Green, which, as a Golden State Warriors fan, is awesome. But Ben Simmons just doesn't like. Well, I shared some highlights in our group chat the other day of like Ben Simmons rookie year, Ben Simmons second year, and fuck like. He's taller than everyone else who dribbles the ball, and if he's going to the rim, he's at least going to try and put the ball in the basket. And most of the time, 6'10" dude who can dribble, he's going to put the ball in the basket just by simply dunking it, right? And this season, he's not even looking at the rim. And like we were wondering what was going to happen when he gets traded to Brooklyn, when he actually takes to the court. What's it going to look like? Is he going to play the Draymond role? Is he going to be at the elbow? Is he going to be doing dribble handoffs? Like, how is he going to exist? And if he can exist, he's with really good shooters. He doesn't have a Joel Embiid there to clog the paint. This is going to be awesome. And it's like, okay, he stands at the high post, and then Kyrie Irving, okay, there will do the little shake and try and give it to him. And then the defense is like, oh, cool, this shit basketball player is going to try to get the ball at the high post. Let's front him. Okay, what are you going to do? Go to the rim? Nah, he's actually just turned around and he's actually just put his head down. He's going to walk into the corner. But not the corner, an extended dunker spot, which he still can't shoot from.
Yeah, he's not afraid to score from that spot, but he's going to be there anyway.
I feel like I've been very much on the Ben Simmons train on offense. I haven't been on defense in past discussions. I've always been pining for more active defenders. But on offense, I've been like, you can live with one non-shooter on the team. Like you can if you've got 4 good shooters, you can exist with one non-shooter. Like just pretend he's the center, right? But this isn't not shooting. This is like he's scared to get to the rim. He's scared to go to the free throw line. He's airballed a layup. And like after we saw, it was a highlight everywhere. Highlight on basketball forever on Instagram. It's a highlight everywhere. And it's like, cool, you've airballed a layup. Fuck, that's the worst thing you could do, man. Like, that's so embarrassing. You can only get better. Like, just keep going to the rim. You are still a large human. You're still hyper athletic. You're still one of the smartest passers when you want to pass and when you know where to get the open shooters. But no, he has a 13.1 usage for your point guard.
Yeah, which isn't great. And I think, I'll compare his situation to another situation of a player coming back off a serious injury and a long time out, which is Dario Saric, who has found himself supplanted in the big rotation by Jock Landale and Bismack Biyombo for Phoenix, even with DeAndre Ayton out. But yesterday against the Wolves, Saric actually got a bit of a run out, and you could kind of see
revenge game.
Yeah, revenge game. I think it was his second appearance of the season, and you can see that he's not very aggressive, and he's actually like a little bit timid, and he's not the usual kind of like bruising rebounder, and he's not trying to like get into people's bodies like he usually does, because he doesn't quite trust his knee. He sat out last season with a torn ACL that he suffered in the previous seasons. Was that a run to the NBA Finals for the Phoenix Suns? I think it was. In the previous season's postseason. So he was out for probably, like 15, 16 months. And doesn't quite have like the game feel back, and he's not kind of quite sure how much his body can give, if he needs to ease into it. But that's fully related to his injury. Ben Simmons pretty clearly has some mental issues going on with his, like you're talking about, like it's just going to the rim.
Yeah.
It's just shooting the shots. He's someone who has always been an aggressive driver, near the top of the league in drives per game throughout his whole career, which is exactly what you need to do if you can't shoot.
You can't shoot.
And that's how he's managed to be an effective offensive player.
An all-star.
An all-star.
An all-NBA player.
He wasn't... Yeah, he was. He was. He's not a multi-time all-star and an effective offensive player, which he was. If someone tries to tell you that he wasn't, that's not true. Like he's averaging 17 and 8 for most of his career.
Yeah.
He was regularly at the top of the league in terms of threes created and transition points. So he is an effective player. He obviously has limitations, but he was an efficient 2-point scorer, like always shooting.
It was always that stat where it's like, oh, but he creates the most threes out of anyone in the league. It's like, yeah, cool, obviously, because he dives to the rim. 3 or 2 dudes have to dive on him, and he's awesome at just knowing who's open. It's like, yeah, he creates threes and he scores his own 2s. No longer.
Well, no longer, because he doesn't have. I'm sure he's trying to get his game feel back, but like he's not even looking at the rim, like you say. He's not even putting himself in situations where he could get the ball. He's literally like me when I'm playing at Coburg, filling in at Coburg on a Monday night with a team that's better than me. I'm just like, I'll just be over here in the corner if you need me. It's kind of, I think it's quite clear that there's like mental stuff going on for him, which is obviously after a long layoff.
And the layoff that it was, the fact that like he obviously had the pass against the Atlanta Hawks, which could have sealed them the win. He had the layoff then, and then he sat out. There was the whole beef with Doc Rivers telling him to come to training. Obviously, there's been the lawsuit with his contract. And then the fact that as soon as he gets traded to Brooklyn, he has these back issues, which people immediately question because of his just quite literal previous track record. And then doesn't play for the whole entire rest of the season when they probably could have done with him.
Not to mention the time that he was like, I'm coming back for game 4.
And he kept saying that.
He didn't come back for game 4. Him aside, like his conduct over the last 18 months, we've discussed that on this show. Like long-time listeners will have heard that discussion, and we don't need to relitigate why and how Ben Simmons has like kind of let himself down, I think. But I mean, on the court, like this is the guy that they got for James Harden. They traded out James Harden for this guy, and at the moment he's a major part of their problem. And he's when you talk about Nick Claxton before, you would have thought or hoped that even if you stripped away Ben Simmons' creative instincts and his offensive impact, that at the very least you could leverage him in some sort of way, just like an athletic big man.
Yeah.
But he's not even really that, because he hasn't fully adjusted to to being someone who's like regularly setting screens and someone who's like regularly playing without the ball in his hands. He doesn't have that feel. You talk about like posting him up at the nail, kind of like a Draymond type operator, or like
a
Sabonis, or like an OG Blake Griffin. But he doesn't know how to do that because he's played point guard his entire career, and he's told everyone that he's a point guard. And now he's playing on a team that already has a point guard, who we spent half an hour talking about at the start of this episode. And his offensive role is like non-existent. So that, aside from the mental things, which I think are obviously playing a huge part in his timidity on the court, this is like a real problem for the Nets, the basketball team, because James Harden was a problem for them for the first 9 games of last season, or whatever it ended up being, because he wasn't trying very hard and he's obviously out of shape. But like this guy, this Ben Simmons that we're seeing now, through 191 non-garbage time minutes, they're minus 13 with him on the floor.
Yeah, and we mentioned it in the off-season saying, oh, but Ben Simmons could be that Draymond type. And, like, on offense, I really hoped he could be that Draymond type. But, like, the discussion was never, on defense, he's going to be, like, the defensive player of the year who can guard the rim, can guard ones. Like, Ben Simmons has never been able to guard the rim, and it's been fine. And it's sort of been fine, sort of not been fine, because it's like you always have to put him with the rim protector, which cramps you on offense, because you can't do subs every single possession.
Which does cramp you on offense. But then, like, Philly had a great defense, like, most
definitely.
Because, and I'll die on this hill, like it's crazy to say that it's crazy that I'm about to say this phrase when he's 26 years old. But Prime Simmons was like in the top 2 or 3 best wing defenders, guard defenders in the whole league.
I wanted you to say this because I was watching a game of basketball the other day, funnily enough with my boss at work, because it was lunchtime, snacking on a pork crackle banh mi with extra meat. And I just put the game on, Brooklyn versus Dallas, right? And then my boss doesn't like Luka Doncic, but I was like, oh, but come on, man! Like you have to respect the fact that Luka just tells 4 dudes to stand in the corners. There's only 2 corners, and then just says, all right, give me your best defender, give me your worst defender, dribble, dribble, dribble. I'm going to create some offense right here, right? And a few times, they would force a switch of Yuta Watanabe onto Luka Doncic, and it's like, oh, that's funny, he cooked him. I wouldn't have guessed that was going to happen. But then the preferred matchup, which was the one that was like they were obviously trying to get around the screens, was Royce O'Neal. And I'm just sitting there going like, why is Royce O'Neal like the preferred option? Obviously, I think he's a really great 3-and-D player. You don't so much. But I think Royce O'Neal is a good defensive option. And it was the option that Steve Nash said he wanted on Luka Doncic. Because the whole time, you've got Ben Simmons sitting on Tim Hardaway Jr. Ben Simmons used to be one of the most lethal perimeter defenders in the whole entire league. Like, just having him and Tybal on the same team was like, dude, just arms and length. How are you ever going to get through that? Like, don't even worry about Joel protecting the rim. How are you going to get through those just 2 dudes right there? And now Ben Simmons is sitting in the corner while Luka Doncic dribbles on the preferred defender, which isn't him. And if he's not the preferred defender, we know that he's not a Draymond type who can defend the rim. He's the most overqualified second defensive perimeter option in the whole entire planet. But you also freak out if he has to defend the rim. It's like, this is a lot of money for a dude. And that's not even like a mental thing on offense. That's just simply like, he's supposed to be that guy on defense, and he isn't. And he had a good defensive play, but he just wasn't the guy who's been trusted.
Maybe, like, I think the thing that we haven't said that we probably should say is that, like, he's feeling his way back. I'm sure that there's an element of that in this, that, like, he'll get his game legs underneath him and he'll kind of, like, you know, you can practice all you want, you can spend the whole off-season training and, you know, doing all of those things, but like it doesn't prepare you for...
Especially if he had a back issue.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the back injury appears to be like a genuine thing that has detracted from his, you know, his last 18 months physically. Hopefully, over the next 10 to 15 games, he can get on the court, get some reps with these guys, get comfortable with his own body and his own game and kind of rediscover and maybe become that guy who was an absolute defensive wrecking ball and like a, you know, a hyper efficient, hyper creative ball handler. But at the moment, like they don't have that, and the problem is that they kind of brought in Royce O'Neal to be the second guy and the roles have been reversed. And you're right, I don't think that Royce O'Neal is actually a fantastic defender, because every time I see Royce O'Neal defending a good player, it's just like they're taking him off the dribble. maybe that's an
Small sample
age-related.
size.
No, I think
yeah.
an age. Royce is kind of getting up there. Like he's in his early 30s now, so
Yeah, he's also just got the right body. Like we've disagreed on this before. I think he's fine.
yeah. Well, whatever. He's fine. He's fine when he's playing sidekick to Simmons, but now that Simmons is playing sidekick to him, that's bad because Kyrie is a non-committal and bad defender when he does commit. KD is still an amazing defender, but like
He has to be locked in.
he has to be locked in, and he also like
Bro, KD in the 2017 finals was like having a tall Draymond. It was fucked.
yeah. I mean, he decided I'm just going to be an awesome defender. I'm just
Yeah.
going to do everything defensively. But I don't think he has those instincts like, and no one has instincts like a Giannis, but like a Giannis, like these kind of like
He can't make up. Yeah,
he's not like roaming like these big, like these
Yeah,
massive
yeah.
help defenders. Like you're kind of like building that into your scheme to say like,
Yeah.
we can compensate for less than adequate rim protection because we're going to give you free reign and let your help instincts take over and like you come out whenever you want to.
Yeah.
You know what to do.
He's
go.
just not that guy.
He's kind of like you're saying, that's your guy. And if that guy gets in a position where you can block the shot, awesome. You keep him in front of you and he does a good job of that. But like that kind of means that there's no good perimeter defenders. And Nick Claxton's having his best season as a pro, looking like a real good rotational center. He still has a bit of propensity for jumping when he shouldn't. He still has propensity for fouling when he shouldn't. And that's the reason why they're 26th in defense through the first 8 games of the season. This team was awesome offensively last season because they had, and the season before, because they had at all times like
KD and Kyrie.
2 to 3 like awesome guys. Now that Ben Simmons is in there gumming it up, like then they're through the first 8 games of the season, they're 18th.
Yeah.
In offense. So
Yeah, and like let's again, as we said after the break, like let's assume Ime Udoka is an incredible defensive coach and he's going to come in and fix their defense. Like I don't know if they can because when he was in Boston, he obviously had the Jays, Rob Williams, Al Horford, Marcus Smart,
like
and
8 awesome defenders.
Even like Peyton Pritchard looked good. I think it's more than just a coaching thing. I think it's a personnel thing, which is again why I said, hey, maybe give Steve Nash a little bit of a job somewhere else because it might be the fact that he was dealt a bad hand. But like even if Ime Udoka can just snap his fingers and they become the number 1 defense in the league, how the fuck do you fix this offense? What do you do?
Well, I mean, you have to. The only way realistically to
like Seth Curry's coming back, Joe Harris is in and out every second day.
But like those guys are good players, but they don't, and they're great shooters, but they don't compensate for the lack of a Ben Simmons with a role.
Yeah,
Ben Simmons. The only 2 possibilities, and this has been for his entire career, is that he's the point guard with the ball, and everyone around him can shoot.
Yeah,
or he's a screener. He's a playmaker on the short roll. Blake Griffin, Draymond Green, like Draymond Green these days, he's still a wildly effective offensive player because
he's actually having a bit of a moment recently.
But he's not shooting. He's taking like 6 shots a game. No one respects him from 3.
He's taking a couple more recently.
Well, he still maintains his offensive efficiency by being like in constant motion. He screens, he cuts, DHOs. Simmons has to be either the point guard, which isn't going to happen because you've got Kyrie and KD as your ball handlers. And all your shooters are little anyway, so you're going to give the backup minutes to Patty Mills and Seth Curry, and The only other thing is that he has to be the second option that I laid out, which he's never done before, never done whatsoever. Being that like screener, roller, short roll, playmaker,
attack off the catch.
Difficult to attack.
For the audio only listeners, which is all of you, I've just signed the cross on me.
He's just done this like a good Catholic boy. If he tries to attack off the catch, he's going to very quickly figure out what Russell Westbrook figured out a few seasons ago, which is that it's difficult to do that when there's 8 feet of space right in front of you and your defender's at the rim.
All right, just to kind of loop it back to one other discussion before we wrap up. Nick Friedel, the aforementioned, went on Zach Lowe's podcast, The Low Post, and they had a little bit of a discussion about everything that's happened with Kyrie Irving, and then in that they had a little nugget that said that Kyrie's trade value is, quote, considered radioactive, unquote, which means that you can't even get the Lakers 2 first-round picks and Taylor Norton Tucker. Obviously you can't, but so that's sort of just makes it really difficult in terms of like, oh, okay, this dude's shit. Can we trade him? It's like, no, he's actually shit for all 30 teams, not just one team right now. He's done a bad thing. He's also going to be a free agent at the end of the year, which means obviously you would get less for him in a trade. But I don't even think that I don't even think that this team's going to be saved by a trade right now. I think, like, what are you going to get for Ben Simmons right now after he puts up a mean 9 and 5 fouls, right? And then that would, of course, mean if this is going to the shit, Kevin Durant doesn't want to be there because he wants to, bless you, he wants to win NBA championships. And your Phoenix Suns were laughed at for offering DeAndre Ayton, Cam Johnson, and 4 future first-round picks in the offseason for Kevin Durant, which I kind of laughed at as well. I don't think that was a very good deal, but I don't reckon a potential deal for Kevin Durant is going to be anywhere near as good as that if he does request a trade or get traded this offseason. So, the only saving grace for the Brooklyn Nets right now, well, there's two. There's 1.5. They can just turn around and win an NBA championship, or it gets blown.
No, they can't.
Or it gets blown up.
How can they do that?
Because at the end of the day, you are pushing a circular thing into a ball, and if you like, if you walk into the NBA tomorrow and get everything right, you could stop sneezing.
That's 4.
You could score 100 points. But secondly, Sean Marks has dug himself out of a hole in terms of rebuilding a team with little to no assets, also known as no assets in the past.
Sean Marks can't dig himself out of this hole, and I'm gonna sit here right now and make a Nets prediction.
Yeah,
this is it. It's done.
What, the franchise? There's going to be 29 teams next year.
This iteration of the Nets is done because.
But don't you like my rose color? Don't you like my optimism? Sean Marks has done it before.
Much like the jerseys that the Nets wear, like the mood is dark and the future is dark. No, I mean Kyrie is gonna get to the end of the season and one of two things will happen. Either they'll just let him walk because they finally. And not that this excuses any of their commitment to him before, because it doesn't. But they finally say, you're not worth the headache, we're just going to let you go. We're going to get nothing for you, but we can't deal with it anymore. You need to leave. Or they're going to fall into the bird rights trap. And because they're over the cap no matter what, they won't be able to use cap space to like sign in another max free agent, you know, or even close to a max free agent. So they re-sign him at a number, and I've been saying it the last 3 years. Like you're not winning a team when you're you're not winning a championship when your culture is led by someone as toxic as Kyrie Irving. KD already wanted out. What do you think he's gonna be thinking now that the team is playing terribly and
it doesn't look like it's ever gonna work.
It doesn't look like it's ever gonna work. Simmons is also untradeable.
Yeah. This is like more hopeless than it was when KD requested a trade.
It is, and there's no trade for any of them. Any of Kyrie, KD, and Simmons that you can swing that is going to make you better in the short term. Any trade is going to make you worse. If you're trading KD for that Suns offer, which you talked about, like awesome, you get to invest in DeAndre Ayton's development and try and turn him into an all-NBA center, which I still think that's definitely possible. Like I would not be shocked if DA has a 25-12 season in him. Not shocked at all, but DA having a 25-12 season like on a winning team and like leading you to the playoffs, like that's a different story.
He would also be the first player since Steph Curry to average 25 points without any dunks.
Yeah, well, we were watching a game the other day. We were watching Suns Pelicans the other day, and in the first quarter, he just absolutely flushed a dunk, and I was like, "What? What?" He didn't pull up 6 feet short and do an over the shoulder right baby hook. No, this iteration of the team is not going to find any significant success.
What do you reckon happens before the trade deadline?
I don't see anyone trading for either Kyrie or Simmons. I think the most likely outcome is that they keep KD and they just roll out this season and they just try and figure out something for next season. Yeah. Sans Kyrie. If they do look into moving on, it will be KD, and they'll just try and trade him for the best thing that they can get for the future. I think let Kyrie walk, and then admit that Simmons is just going to be maybe a bit of an albatross if he can't get his mojo back.
Just before we wrap up, I remember having a discussion with you after the open of 2019 free agency, where we said, who won this free agency? Was it the Clippers for getting Kawhi and Paul George, or was it the Nets for getting KD and Kyrie? And it was such an incredible free agency to be a part of. Was that 2018?
Great time to be a basketball fan.
2019.
2019.
Man, like, both those franchises, still no rings, not looking great for it.
Not looking great for it, but I mean, you'd much rather be the Clippers. And if we were betting men, which we're not, you'd be putting your money on the Clippers, because at least you say, all right, if Kawhi comes back, and he's healthy, then you've got 2 All-NBA wings and a whole bunch of high-quality role players. I mean, figuring out exactly what the Nets have even on the basketball court, as we've tried to do for the last 25 minutes, is hard enough without all of the toxicity that comes with the rest of the organization. I mean, I'll be like, just to cap things like for the whole episode, because obviously there's been a lot of yucky stuff that we've talked about. Man, I hope next week's episode is like cheery and we're like feeling good about the NBA. But just to cap it all, like, I'll be very happy when this on-court era of Nets basketball is done, so we don't have to spend all of our time talking about Kyrie and KD and being toxicity and temperamentality and Ben Simmons thrown into the mix, because that just makes it worse. But like, I think this whole era has been a failure of leadership from the top down, and that for all of his, like, Josiah kind of has somehow avoided criticism for the whole time that this has all been going on. I guess he's just the owner, but Josiah is empowering Sean Marks to empower Kyrie Irving.
Yeah. And
Sean Marks has been making decisions for a few years now because it's clear that he believes that the team has invested too many assets into this core to let it fail. That he's been kind of blind to what I think is the truth that has been apparent all along, which is that you just can't win when your team culture is set. The tone is set by someone like Kyrie. Like, you're never going to find sustained success.
Let's reminisce and watch some Brooklyn Nets bench celebrations 2016-17 after this.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like, let's get some fucking
with that old thing.
Let's get some he got that old thing. Let's get some positivity into that vibe. But well, I was just gonna say, hopefully we can reconvene next week and talk about some awesome basketball. Maybe we talk about the 7-1 Phoenix Suns, top of the West. Maybe we talk about the 6-1 Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe let's talk about some fun stuff next week.
There'll be some things to talk about. In the meantime, watch Lucas's video on YouTube, the Deep 2 NBA podcast. Find it on all our socials. Follow all our socials. And Dante, I'll speak to you next week.
Peace.
We were over the moon when we first heard that the NBA was going to be televised on Australian free-to-air TV in the 2019-20 season. It didn't exactly go swimmingly, with the nasty cough halting the season and games getting cancelled left, right and centre, but it was a huge step and an exciting one for basketball fans all across the country.
Better yet, it wasn't a commercial channel cashing in on some basketball nerds like us. It was SBS, one of our public broadcasters. Unfortunately, the NBA wasn't the only thing SBS was pushing last season. They also ran advertisements from Sportsbet, Ladbrokes, Bet365, BetEasy and Neds, some of the biggest sports betting companies in Australia.
In a one step forwards, two steps backwards move, SBS has dropped the ball here. As a public broadcaster, SBS plays a key role in providing relevant, culturally appropriate health information to local communities. The last thing SBS should be doing is offering a platform for gambling companies during the most financially unstable time in recent memory.
This past year, men aged 18 to 24 made up 79% of new gambling account holders, with increased median spending and frequency of bets. This is the last thing we should be spending our money on given the financial uncertainty that comes with the pandemic. During COVID lockdowns, wagering companies spent more money on advertising and incentives to gamble, and it worked. SBS needs to hear from viewers that gambling ad revenue isn't worth the harm it causes. Call on the SBS chair, George Savitas, to put community health ahead of gambling revenue by signing the petition at www.endgamblingAds.org.au/get gambling off SBS with hyphens in between.